The first stone wall came down in under 7 minutes. General Threx of the Drazari Horde watched from the jagged ridge above the valley. Arms folded behind his back, as the human defensive barrier collapsed in a cloud of pulverized concrete and dust. His translator unit buzzed softly as one of his lieutenants approached. Another wall of stone and steel, no energy grids, no adaptive shielding. They're still using rebar. Threx didn't turn. They build like frightened herbivores, hide behind fences. Pray the predator is too tired to climb, the lieutenant grunted. They call it Fort Meriton, one of their last. Threx's second mouth curled slightly at the edge. No matter, our siege crawlers will flatten the next 10. The Drazari had conquered 67 planets. Their siege doctrines were unmatched rotating plasma drills, gravitational destabilizers, acoustic fracture lines. They turned fortresses into powder. Human defenses, it seemed, were simply quaint. But then came the counterassault. It started 2 days later, well after the Drazari had breached the outer defenses and were pushing toward the heart of the human-controlled territory in the Appalachian wastes. The terrain was jagged, the air thick with ash and pollen from scorched forests. The Drazari began setting up mobile artillery platforms along the remains of the wall, laughing at least their version of it at the crude cement and steel. Private Trent Oleson had been watching them from the collapsed cellar of a farmhouse on the ridge opposite. He was mud-caked, bloodied at the temple, and running on the last of his Roman IV fluids. His left shoulder had been dislocated during the retreat from the second line. A medic had popped it back in the night before, but it still felt like fire every time he moved it. His radio crackled. "They're moving siege crawlers into the clearing. You seeing this, Oleson?" "Yeah," Trent muttered, adjusting his scope. "I see them, big bastards. Command says wait for signal. We go loud when the sun hits the tree line." He checked his watch. 12 minutes. The siege crawlers were massive 20-ton tripedal beasts with rotating plasma drills and automatic stabilizers. They'd crushed 3 major human fortresses in the last month. One of them was Fort Keller, where Trent's brother had died. He shifted his weight, winced, and kept his eye on the crawler's leg joints. The weak spot was always the movement. You couldn't armor a joint completely and still make it flexible. The sun finally kissed the top of the trees. The first explosion came from the east ridge, well-placed anti-grav mines Trent had helped bury the night before, despite his half-useless arm. The crawler nearest the ridge lurched, its stabilizers hissing violently as the mine ripped its footing out from underneath. It toppled sideways into a ravine, smashing through layers of shale. Trent didn't flinch. He exhaled once, then squeezed the trigger. The armor-piercing round hissed from his rail rifle. It tore through the exposed vent below the crawler's primary drill. A moment later, the machine erupted from within, a fireball shooting into the air. The heat washed over the field. From every direction, human soldiers emerged not in straight lines like the Drazari expected, but weaving through terrain, popping from camouflaged positions, striking and vanishing. They moved in 3s and 4s, communicating with hand signals and bursts of laser pulses. They didn't have the same technology, but they had patience. They had planning. Trent slid down the embankment, rifle slung tight. He passed 2 medics dragging a wounded corporal to cover. "Status," Trent shouted. "Broken femur, maybe pelvis too. We called for evac. Keep pressure. Don't lift his legs." The medic nodded, sweat pouring from his forehead. Trent sprinted toward the nearest siege crawler still standing. He ducked a beam of plasma that scorched a crater into the ground beside him. Dirt and heat slammed into his face. He kept moving. He reached the crawler's leg, planted a magnetic charge, and ducked behind a chunk of rebar just as the explosion tore through its base. The crawler groaned, shuddered, then collapsed in a heap of sparking metal and ignited fuel. Drazari troops began retreating, if you could call it that. They weren't used to fallback orders. Their doctrine didn't account for being outmaneuvered by what they considered primitives. Above them, a human drone dropped a payload of flash bombs. The air lit up like noon. Trent felt the heat even through his gloves. "Push, push now," someone yelled in his calm. He ran, heart hammering, as the last crawler tried to reverse. Too late. Another mine exploded beneath it. The machine groaned, cracked in half, and spilled molten coolant across the field. Trent stumbled behind a barricade of sandbags and dropped to one knee, gasping. He looked up. Drazari General Threk stood on the far ridge, flanked by his guards. The alien was still unreadable. But he did not descend. He didn't even give the order to counterattack. Because for the first time in the campaign, the Drazari siege masters were no longer laughing at human walls. They were staring at battlefield tactics. They hadn't prepared for tactics that didn't rely on brute force or perfect technology, but on flexibility, improvisation, and a kind of stubborn, furious resolve. That night, Trent sat in the field hospital, arm in a sling, head stitched, ribs taped. The doctor had confirmed a cracked rib, some internal bruising. He wasn't cleared for combat for at least 3 weeks. "Lucky you weren't closer to that crawler when it blew," said a nurse checking his vitals. "Yeah," Trent muttered. "Real lucky." He glanced around the field tent. Soldiers in cots, some unconscious, some whispering. A few cried. A young private across the aisle was missing a leg. He stared at the ceiling, silent. No one was celebrating. That's not how counterassaults worked. You didn't cheer the dead, but you remembered who they died for. A captain walked in, mud on her boots and a tablet in her hand. "Oleson," she said. "Command wants you to brief the next wave. They're moving toward Fort Claiborne next week. You know more than anyone about crawler leg joints." Trent blinked. "I'm not even cleared to stand without help." "You can sit and talk, that's all they need," he nodded slowly. "All right," she tapped her tablet. "You saw what worked, that intel's gold, don't waste it." As she turned to leave, she paused. "You made a dent today." "Bigger than you know." Trent didn't respond. He just leaned back, eyes closed for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of boots, moans, and distant thunder. The siege masters had mocked their walls. But walls weren't the only defense humans knew how to build. And now, the Drazari would learn what happened when those walls pushed back. The antiseptic sting hit Trent's nostrils before he even opened his eyes. Something cold and metallic pressed against his ribs. He shifted slightly, only to feel the tug of adhesive strips pulling at his skin. A dull throb pulsed near his collarbone, and the bandages along his side stuck uncomfortably to the thin blanket draped over him. It was late morning, the kind where the sun came through the canvas roof of the medical tent like a backlit ghost. Dust floated in the light shafts, undisturbed for now. Somewhere across the compound, a generator coughed into life. Closer, someone was muttering about missing saline bags. Trent turned his head slowly, the movement tugging at the Roman 4 line taped to his wrist, and saw a figure hunched over a chart. The doctor was sorting through a tray of wound gauze with one hand while scribbling with the other. Thin and wiry, he wore fatigues under the surgical apron, and his shaved scalp glistened with sweat. "You're up," the doctor said without looking. "Was hoping I dreamt the part where a siege walker tried to stomp my face in. Sorry, the walker's real, your face somehow is still attached." Trent exhaled and tried to sit up. His torso disagreed immediately. "Don't," the doctor warned, finally glancing at him. "You're lucky your lung didn't collapse. 2 cracked ribs, a fractured scapula, and a whole lot of muscle trauma. You stand too fast, you're going to pass out and make my day worse." Trent eased back down. "How long have I been out?" 18 hours. "We pulled some shrapnel out of your side while you were unconscious. Your left shoulder's going to scream for a while. You're on low-dose morphine enough to keep you from sobbing, not enough to make you think you can do push-ups." The flap at the front of the tent rustled and a tall silhouette stepped in. The boots didn't match regulation issue, sleek, jointed, and clicking faintly. Not human. Trent tensed. The figure was accompanied by a human interpreter, a corporal with a datapad clutched to her chest and a nervous look on her face. The alien was tall, easily over 7 feet, its skin a deep violet blue marbled with gray. Its limbs moved with a fluidity that made it hard to guess where joints were. It wore a matte breastplate marked with the concentric hexagonal insignia of the Drazari Vanguard, though it was scratched and scorched at the edges. The doctor didn't look up. "Tell your new friend not to bleed on anything." The corporal cleared her throat. "This is Sub-Colonel Keln of the Drazari Diplomatic Detachment. He's not here under arms." Trent raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding." "I'm not authorized for jokes." Keln stepped forward, eyes if that's what they were narrowing toward Trent. His mouth opened vertically and a low, vibrating series of clicks emerged. The translator around his neck lit up. "You are the one who brought down the third siege mechanism." Trent looked at the corporal. "He always open with compliments." He's attempting a formal recognition. "Charming." Keln tilted his head. "You are injured. It is inefficient for your kind to fight while broken." Trent almost laughed, but it hurt too much. "We don't wait to be fixed. We fight on the way." The Drazari processed that slowly, his mandibles twitching faintly. "You disassemble our machines without parity of strength. This is counter to your physiology. You mean we're not supposed to win, you are not designed to." The doctor snorted. "Fantastic bedside manner." Keln turned his head slightly. "I do not understand your strategic priority. You suffer major injury, expend valuable resources to recover, then return to the same scenario." "We're not machines," Trent said. "That's the difference. You break, you replace, we heal. And we remember." The room fell quiet for a moment, save for the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor 2 cots down. Keln's gaze didn't waver. "I have studied your recorded engagements. Your species lacks standardization. No 2 units operate identically. Must drive you nuts. It is inefficient. And unpredictable." "That's the point." Keln's jaw twitched. "You fight terrain as much as you fight us. Your tactics shift by hour. You ever try to march through a pine forest after it rains? Nothing marches, you crawl. Or you fall." Keln took a long step forward, eyeing the bandages on Trent's torso. "Your injuries are non-lethal, but painful, getting better. Why return to the front? Why are you here if you already lost a crawler team?" Keln paused. "To understand the anomaly. The anomaly is that we're still breathing." The Drazari's translator buzzed faintly as it processed something more complex. When Keln finally responded, there was a hesitation behind the words. "You have no single doctrine. You adapt mid-conflict. This is not expected." Trent shifted, wincing. "That's how you survive. You stop expecting." Keln was silent for several seconds. The corporal glanced between them, clearly wishing she were somewhere else. The doctor muttered something about interspecies posturing and went back to sorting gauze. Eventually, Keln said, "Your commanders rely on individual initiative over collective instruction. That's not an accident. It is statistically unstable, probably, but statistics don't win fights, people do." Keln turned to the corporal. "I will require access to additional engagement logs. You'll have to request that through command liaison, not me." Keln clicked once, then turned without ceremony and exited the tent. The corporal followed, looking relieved. Trent exhaled slowly. "That was surreal." The doctor finally looked up. "You just gave a walking lizard a philosophy lesson while full of morphine. Least I didn't try to hug him. Careful, you'll pull a stitch." A nurse entered, carrying a tray with 2 blood bags and a handheld scanner. She moved to the cot next to Trent's and began prepping a transfusion. The soldier in that bed, a woman with a crushed hand and burned tape across half her face, was still unconscious. "Is she going to make it?" Trent asked quietly. The doctor's jaw tightened. "Probably. We had to clean the wounds without full anesthesia. The burn gel's holding. If her fever breaks by morning, she'll stay out of the ICU." Trent nodded, then shifted again, more carefully this time. "You ever treat one of them, Drazari?" "Once. Back when they still thought we were amusing. Some diplomatic observer got hit with a pressure mine, didn't even know how to report pain, just kept staring at the stump. What happened? We patched him. He left. I heard he filed a formal complaint with their war college about our field medicine. Too messy. Too emotional." The tent fell quiet again, save for the occasional cough or shuffle from the other cots. Outside, the wind picked up, fluttering the edge of the canvas. Trent lay back, staring at the seams above him. "You think this war ends with us winning?" The doctor didn't answer right away. He finished scanning a vitals chart, then leaned against the supply shelf. "No, I think it ends when they stop believing we're something to conquer." "And how do we prove that?" The doctor shrugged, folding his arms. "By surviving longer than they thought possible." "Maybe longer than we thought possible." Trent closed his eyes. The morphine was tugging again, dulling the edge of his ribs, softening the burn in his back. Sleep crept in like a fog. The last thing he heard was the sound of someone outside yelling for more plasma packs, followed by the low, unmistakable growl of another crawler in the far distance. Only this time, it wasn't approaching. It was retreating. By late afternoon, the medical tent's air had thickened with the heat of too many bodies and not enough ventilation. The canvas walls pulsed gently with every gust, but no breeze made it inside. The generator outside had been groaning for hours, and the antiseptic tang in the air had turned metallic, like someone had boiled steel wool in vinegar. Trent sat hunched on the edge of his cot, left arm hanging in a sling, right hand gripped around a chipped canteen. His ribs stabbed every time he twisted, but it was better than lying flat and watching the same seam in the ceiling. He'd been given clearance to walk to the latrine earlier, though the nurse had hovered the entire time like he might forget what a foot was. Across from him, the woman with the crushed hand had woken. She hadn't spoken, but her eyes tracked everything. The way she blinked slower whenever someone walked past suggested she was memorizing faces. The tent flap rustled again. This time, another Drazari entered, shorter than Keln, but broader, with armor that looked ceremonial. No insignia, no rank marks, just matte black plating with a single vertical gash down the chest. He carried no weapon, but his gait was deliberate, as though he didn't need one. Behind him, a young translator wheezed under the weight of a portable audio link unit strapped to his back. Trent didn't move. The alien stopped 3 paces from his cot and tilted his head, eyes scanning Trent's bandaged torso, the sling, the bruises still flowering along his neck. "I am not here to offer peace," the translator said after a moment. "That's a hell of an opener. I am here to understand what cannot be documented. Try a library." The alien paused. "Your sarcasm is not a defense." Trent uncapped the canteen. "It's not meant to be." The translator adjusted a dial, and the alien continued. "I am Varnech. I trained siege doctrines for 200 rotations. I designed the crawler formations that breached the Geltok spires on Yurn 3. The humans were not expected to endure beyond a single campaign. Guess we missed the memo. You were never the primary study subject. Your methods are unsystematic." Trent took a slow sip, wincing. "We get creative when dying's the only other option." Varnech looked toward the unconscious soldiers. "Your species incurs wounds disproportionate to your strategic gains. We don't measure gains the way you do. You preserve structures instead of territory. You protect damaged personnel. You reroute combat units to recover fallen. That's not inefficient, that's human." Varnech took a slow step forward. "You risk operational integrity for sentiment. Integrity without sentiment is just a checklist." The translator blinked at that but said nothing. Trent leaned forward, resting his good elbow on his knee. "You think resilience comes from strength, but it's the opposite. It comes from knowing how much you can lose and still keep going." Varnech didn't respond immediately. He reached into a compartment at his hip and withdrew a small crystalline module, no bigger than a thumb joint. He placed it on the edge of the cot. "This contains the crawler footage from your engagement. We reviewed your unit's maneuvers." There was no centralized command. We didn't have time to wait for orders. You improvised based on prior injury reports. You used topography that had not been recorded. Trent shrugged. "You call it improvising, we call it doing what we have to." Varnech's jaw tightened. "You modified a disabled crawler into an explosive decoy. It destroyed our rear support team. You left it running. We just gave it a new purpose." Another pause. Varnich turned to leave but stopped at the flap. We assumed you would break under pressure. Pressure's where we sharpen. When the alien and his translator left, the tent fell back into familiar noise. The hiss of Roman 4 pumps, the cough of someone trying not to wake a neighbor, the occasional clatter of a tray outside. Trent exhaled slowly, then looked at the crystal still resting on the edge of his cot. The nurse returned a while later to check his bandages. She was brisk, with a sunburn peeling on her nose and the kind of hands that moved like they had better things to do. You're healing fast, she said, unwrapping the gauze. No signs of infection. Scar's gonna be ugly, though. I don't plan on entering any swimsuit contests. You're lucky. The guy in cot 7 had the same shrapnel pattern, didn't make it to evac. Trent winced as she cleaned the wound. I was behind a slab of concrete. Probably saved me, she nodded. Don't get too attached. That concrete's in 4 pieces now. When she finished, she tucked the supplies back into a small tray and hesitated. They're pulling back, you know, the crawlers, the whole unit. Drazari commands reassigning siege forces to orbital survey. They're not saying retreat, but they're not pushing either. Trent sat back slowly. They're stalling. Or they're recalculating. She left before he could ask what she meant. By sundown, the field hospital had quieted. Most of the wounded were asleep or sedated. The only light came from the biolamps hung above the entrance, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the cots. Trent lay back, staring at the ceiling again. His breathing came easier than the night before. The tightness in his chest had faded to a dull ache. The flap opened once more. This time it was a child. No older than 14, dressed in oversized fatigues and a helmet that wobbled when she moved. She carried a tray of protein bars and a jug of water, clearly assigned to evening rounds. She stopped by his cot, squinting. You the guy who blew up the crawler with a pipe bomb and a shovel, he blinked. Not exactly, but close. She handed him a bar. They've been talking about it at the South Post. They said you wedged it into the leg joint and used the crawler's own weight to set it off. Who's they? My brother. He's on comms. He says the Drazari are scared of you now. Trent opened the wrapper and took a bite. They're not scared of me. They're confused. Big difference. Still. You made them run. That's something. She gave him a crooked grin, then moved on to the next cot. Later, when the sky outside had turned a deep violet and the generator finally choked into silence, Trent sat alone in the quiet. The crystal Varnich had left still sat beside him, untouched. He picked it up. No lights, no interface, just a small sliver of evidence that the unstoppable had been stopped, not with lasers or tanks or superior numbers, but with choice, with grit. With a bad shoulder and a pipe full of explosives, he placed it gently into the pouch at his side. Across the tent, the unconscious woman stirred. Her eyes opened halfway. She didn't speak, just blinked once slowly. Trent nodded at her. Welcome back. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Outside, the wind shifted. The scent of ash was gone. There would be no more crawlers that night. And for the first time in weeks, the human walls, what was left of them, stood unchallenged.